Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I interview founders, co-founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, artists, you name it, in crypto and blockchain globally. And today I have an amazing guest. I'm really looking forward to this interview. His name is John Trask. He is the CEO and founder of Dimitra. John, welcome.
Hi. Hey, good day, Jamil. I appreciate you having me here and good to be speaking with you.
Pleasure's all mine, and I'm happy to speak with you too. And I'm really looking forward to this interview because it's going to cover an area that I haven't really covered that much, and I've always been interested in. It's the ag tech space. So, um, first, though, I'll start off and ask you, what is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
I think my background has evolved over the years. When I got out of school, I studied computer programming, worked as a computer programmer, um, and then worked in logistics. And so my background is originally technical, and then it was technical from an implementation perspective of systems to support logistics and supply chain systems. So I worked in food and agriculture and government and automotive and consumer goods, all with a view of moving products around the world. So I think it fits quite well. And then as a child, I grew up spending a lot of time on my grandfather's farm and working the farm all summer when I wasn't in school. Um, and so I've got a little bit of a farming background from the perspective of the exposure I have on my grandfather's farm in Nova Scotia, Canada.
Interesting. So, what was it like growing up on a farm?
I guess when you grow up on a farm, you develop some work ethic associated with that. Certainly, you're spending a lot of time outdoors, so it's enjoyable as a child. Um, but at the same time, it's a lot of hard work. You're out, you know, haying and caring for animals and caring for crops. So there's pros and cons. As a teenager, I think as a lot of teenagers do, you want to move away from that and go on and strike out into your own space. And I did that. And then later in my life, I got exposure to supply chains that were associated with food and farming. And it was a chance for me to bring all of that back together from a technical perspective. So be exciting to be able to apply some of that background and apply some of that knowledge that my grandfather taught me on the farm.
So, let's get into that. Dimitra, what is Dimitra all about, and what makes you a game changer in the ag tech space?
Yeah, so Dimitra is a technology company, and we are focused on small farmers around the world. We apply a number of technologies in order to do that. We'll talk a little bit more about those technologies as the interview goes on. Um, we started a number of years ago building a system for um, track and trace for cattle. I've also built some systems around track and trace of various commodities and particularly agricultural commodities. And then we brought that all together. We do a few things different. One is we're a very broad application provider. We provide technology right from the soil prior to planting all the way to market. And we fill a number of gaps in that space. One of the challenges in the ag tech space that farmers have is that often they may need 3 or 4 or 5 different applications in order to run their farm. We try to bring that all together in one application and leverage the data that comes out of each of those processes that farmers follow in order to supply the food space, um, and help them make better decisions. We make that available on blockchain, which provides certain advantages, and that makes us a bit of a game changer in the space. And we were very early into artificial intelligence. Um, so we use a lot of analysis tools to help us evaluate farms' performance and help them make better decisions around how to plant, when to plant, what to plant, as well as how do they use that data to substantiate financial opportunities where they may be borrowing or looking for investment in order to execute a project. One key thing you probably need to know about us is we generally don't sell to individual farms. We really are focused on working with governments or cooperatives or farming unions. So when we work with a cooperative, we may be working with many hundreds or many thousands of farmers, all focused on the same commodity. So those are a few things about us that make us a little bit different than our peers.
I I want to find out how you use, machine learning, Internet of Things, genomics, all the technologies, but I like to do it in a way perhaps that is kind of simplistic so that people understand, like you said, because you said you your technology is you use your technology before you even put the seed in the soil, right? Like if I were to want to plant a seed and then go take it from cradle to grave to sell it in the supermarket, how would I do that using your technologies? And each step along the way, what do you use?
Yeah, so if we start with a farm, the very first thing we do is we ask the farm to define a geofence or a border around their farm so that we can access satellite data about the farm. With that satellite data and some additional oracles and data that is available to us, we can evaluate what crops should be grown on that farm and what the advantages and disadvantages of the farm have so that the farmer can make decisions. So I'll give you an example. In Kenya, we can look at a farm and look at about 20 criteria on that farm and evaluate to an extent some soil conditions, um, meteorological conditions, moisture, availability to water, availability to highways, different things that impact decisions around what you want to grow. And we can scorecard that. And then using the scorecard in each one of those categories, we can evaluate and make recommendations on what a farmer should be doing to compensate for the weaknesses on the farm. So prior to planting, the farmer will tell us about their soil. In some areas, we buy soil sensors and let the cooperatives go out and take readings across the different farms. And they give us an idea of the chemistry of the soil. And then we can take that information and evaluate the crop that's being grown and what nutrients are needed in the soil in order to make that farm successful. And with that, we make recommendations on what they should change or how they should prepare their soil in order to provide them the most success based on all of those criteria. And so we use a really regional strategy. Let's say you're growing tomatoes. Growing tomatoes isn't the same everywhere in the world. Um, in Canada, where I'm from, you need to worry about weather. Frost is a huge problem. So your planting date becomes really important. And planting date is changing around the world for a lot of crops because of what's happening with the climate. So we need to monitor climatic activities to make a recommendation on when is the best time to plant. Um, So when we do that and we look at machine learning, we start applying not only tables, which are recommendations that agronomists have figured out over the years, but some predictive elements using machine learning in order to help predict the best times to plant and evaluate various changes in soil and soil management activities in order to give a farmer a really good result. That makes sense.
Never thought of it that way. With predictive learning, so predictive learning has a massive role, right, in machine learning, and also in blockchain, right? So, um, your system, actually, you're active in 18 countries. You mentioned Kenya, right? And most of those countries are very diverse in their geographic climates, right? So, what are some of the initiatives? What are some of the work that you've done in like areas like Honduras and Brazil and Indonesia, and then with the climate change and predictive learning as a factor?
Yeah, so if I start with Brazil, we have a number of projects in Brazil. One of them, we work for a group called Abrafrutas, which is a fruit uh, group. They work with farms that represent about 75% of the fruit exports of Brazil. We're employed by them as consultants, and we help them look at specific issues. Um, One of the core areas that we do work is in disease management. So we've built an early prediction system for citrus canker. Citrus canker is a disease that is experienced all over the world. It's bacteria based, and predicting it early can help save orchards or fruit groves. It's very devastating if farmers get citrus canker on their farm and they lose a lot of their trees. Initially, you lose productivity on your trees, and then eventually your fruit doesn't become saleable. So we've built an early warning system for that for Brazil. Beyond that, we work on productivity projects with mango, and we work on deforestation identification for compliance. And we use machine learning and satellite in order to evaluate trees and the presence of trees prior to a cutoff. The EU has a new regulation coming out, the EUDR. It was voted into law earlier this year, with the implementation starting next year. So companies are starting to get ready. There's 7 core commodities, and anybody who exports those to Europe needs to make sure that their farm has not been involved in deforestation in the last couple of years. So there's some timing that farms need to meet, and then there's some definition of deforestation. In order to manage that deforestation, we have to use satellite to evaluate, what is forest versus what is maybe an agricultural tree, and then how many of those trees were on a property in the last 2 years, and how many of those have been removed either through forestry or through natural means over the last couple of years, and provide a compliance report for an individual farm to show that they're meeting the EU regulations and they're meeting their country regulations. So in Brazil, there's many areas of the country where a farmer must maintain 30% forest cover on their property. And if they dip below that, their farming license or business license is in jeopardy. So we help with that from a compliance perspective. That allows corporations, European chocolate makers, for example, to evaluate whether a farm and their product complies and can meet the export standards. So that's, a very short example of what we're doing in Brazil, we have a couple deals in Honduras on coffee. And so there's a large coffee organization, over 100,000 farmers. We're running a trial with a group of, think about 3,000 farmers, in order to evaluate the system this year. And then we're also running a program with a women's cooperative. It's focused on cocoa. And we're working with a couple other smaller organizations now to expand our footprint in Honduras. Kenya, I mentioned the project. It was avocados. So we have a great initiative there with a group called 1 Million Avocados. Their goal is to plant 1 million avocado trees over the next years in East Africa. Avocados are an interesting crop from the perspective of revenue per square meter. The revenue is quite strong per square meter. The challenge for farmers in Kenya is that when you plant an avocado tree, it takes 5 or 6 years to really start producing a large amount of fruit, and 10 or more years before a tree is fully mature. If you can get a farm to give up the land in order to plant an avocado tree, it creates generational wealth. Avocado trees produce for many, many years, decades, and provide a high level of income versus many staple crops. And creating a balance with Kenyan farmers is one of our objectives. How do you take a piece of land in order to increase the revenue per square foot or per square meter relative to the cost, and get them to a state where their income largely provides for their family and helps provide for the community? And if you look at African farms in general, the revenue per farm is quite low. It's over 570 million farms in the world that we would consider smallholder farmers. And typically a smallholder farmer has a real struggle in today's market in meeting all of the compliance rules, but also producing enough good quality fruit or vegetables in order to live above the poverty line. So our Kenyan project is built around that, increasing the revenue, increasing the quality, and maintaining compliance so that they can export. Domestically in Kenya, a farmer may only get 30 or 40 cents for his avocados, but on the export market can get about $1.50. So using the system, you can measure all of the important information that has to be provided to the exporters and the importers in order to get that dollar value for the crop. And then Indonesia, lastly, we're very largely focused on coffee. We have thousands of coffee farmers using our app there, and we're expanding our reach with coffee around the world. And then we've taken on some recent projects around cattle and vertically integrating farms using cattle, not only to provide fertilizer for their crops, but consume some of the waste coming out of the palm processes. There are ways to use some of that waste in order to fatten your cattle and grow them, but also reduce some of the waste and challenges associated with the agricultural processes. So we're trying to create a closed loop cycle there, and we're working with a couple of universities and government organizations in order to do that.
Sounds excellent. Sounds excellent to me. So far we covered the what you do, we covered how you do it. I'm interested in covering the why. So why primarily are farmers in these marginalized areas or rural areas so open to implementing your revolutionary tech solutions?
I think there's a lot of different reasons, and I can go through a few of them. So with coffee in Indonesia, initially, we did our contract with Solak Rajo Coffee, and they do a lot of export into America and Europe. A lot of their large customers had a concern around traceability and proving the origin of the coffee. It is very important to consumers, particularly in Europe and in America. So tracking back to the original farm and having evidence of transactions on those farms provides value for the end user. And blockchain becomes a perfect tool for that. And then combining that with mobile, where we can evaluate GPS signals where people are doing the work, and the frequency of that work allows us to provide a lot of that provenance data. A lot of the previous export documents, people would say it's coming from a particular farm, but really not have any evidence that it came from the particular farm. They wouldn't have a GPS device, they wouldn't have um, a cell phone with GPS on, and they wouldn't evaluate the farm and the potential output of that farm versus the amount that was shipped. And what we found around the world is that there's high levels of fraud in some of that documentation. And using a system helps those farmers mitigate the risk of that fraud and prove who they are and where they are. And then recording on that blockchain provides a permanent record that they can share with the entire supply chain. Others are looking for particular health information. Some farms are trying to fight disease and pests. We ran a project in Papua New Guinea last year, and that project was about using drones and satellite to evaluate the penetration of fall armyworm into cornfields. And when fall armyworm invades cornfields, it can eat 50% of the crop and destroy so much that it's very difficult to sell it commercially, and then the product has to be used elsewhere. So we took drones in, we took a pilot, we flew drones over the fields, we identified areas of penetration of fall armyworm on the farm. We also had traps set up to count the number of fall armyworm in certain areas. And then we actually used drones to precision spray the fall armyworm. So we didn't have to spray the entire crop. We could really focus on areas of high penetration of the pest and minimize the amount of pesticides used, minimize the environmental impact of that, prevent some of the runoff because you're minimizing that and some of the other environmental issues with it. So there are lots of reasons. Others are looking to market their products and have records of their products. And then lastly, we look at projects where we know that there are limitations from a finance perspective, and providing additional data to those farmers may allow them to access loans or investment because they can prove that their procedures are effective, that their land is properly set up and properly managed in order to produce the best result, and provide some level of security or assurance is probably a better word to the individual lenders, be that a DeFi lender or a CeFi lender, around the performance of the farm so that they can evaluate, what is the potential of the loan being paid or the investment being paid off. So lots of different reasons. And we would bucket those in different areas, and each project would be set up with one or two objectives. So those are the reasons the farmers want to take place with our system, and even the lenders want to use our system.
Sounds like a lot of good benefits to your system. What have you found have been some of the with any entrepreneur and any new business? Of course, you're going to come up with people who are against you, people who fight you, and even what some of the resistance areas that you're finding to for the rollout of your system.
I think the biggest challenge we have is farmers typically around the world, in developing nations, are not used to collecting data. And so there's resistance from the perspective of how much data do they need to provide, and what is that data being used for, and then who's it shared with. And so when we go into a group, and if I take the Solic Rajo group, for example, which was the group of coffee farms, their customer wanted traceability information. And when we went out into the field originally, all the farmers want to provide that information because it gets them more dollars for their, and it secures their customer for the product. The negative is farmers tend to work very long days, out in the dirt, out in the crops, and have to make changes in their day and changes in their behavior in order to collect specific pieces of data. So some are quite good at it. Some of the farms have family members who are very comfortable with tech, or very comfortable with mobile devices or computers. But there is a large group in the farming world who have spent most of their life without tech, who don't operate on a smartphone, who don't have experience with social media. And so it does create a point of resistance where they don't always enter the information that's required. And that creates challenges not only for us, but for them, and providing the appropriate data to their customers. So we've had to make training decisions in order to support that. In Indonesia, originally we did a deal with Andalas University, and Andalas University sent teams of 30 students out to the farms to work with the farmers and teach them how to use the application. But even more than that, they sometimes had to teach them how to use a mobile phone, and how to use an application on a mobile phone trying to collect this data, and when they should collect the data. So I think from a user adoption perspective, you get a real mixed bag of users. And from an effort perspective, we need to put a lot of effort to make sure that those users who aren't as familiar with technology have the ability, the knowledge, and the practice in using the system.
Interesting. Um, you know, I didn't think about this till just now. I want to get your assessment on this. I was thinking in terms of farming, but I think your system can change the global export balance around the world. But how about the precision device business around the world as well? How would you like that would be part of it, wouldn't it? And how is your system a game changer in not only farming but the use of technology in the import export industry?
Yeah, so we do use a lot of devices. We use RFID tags. We use IoT devices in order to collect, temperature and moisture and humidity levels. We use IoT devices to track the route of products throughout the supply chain. And I think we certainly use a lot of this technology in pilots and trials, where we're trying to figure out how do we solve a problem for a client and what devices do we need in order to solve that, particularly when we're looking at combating diseases or combating pests. We had bought these drones last year for this project, and knew with drones we could get much higher resolution imagery than we could get with satellite. And with that high resolution imagery, we could find the actual pests. And then at the same time, you need to combat those pests or you lose the crop. So you've got to spray them. And so you can precision spray. And a bit of that was a science project for us. We knew it was possible. There had been studies done on it before, but then we have to develop it from a practical application perspective and make it cost efficient for a farmer. So, it's exciting in our world to be able to work on those projects and try to revolutionize some of the industry with practical applications for technology. And I think there's a lot of growth in that area in the agricultural space. Agriculture largely is probably behind a lot of other industries from a tech implementation perspective, and the application of IoT and satellite and drones and various types of sensor systems really can make an impact on improving the output of a farm, or reducing some of the costs, or reducing some of the risks. And as we do that, we can measure quality of the product and measure performance of the farm. And I think over the next decade, we're going to see a lot of applications of those technologies really shake up the world and make changes from a product perspective. And maybe, like you say, even change export balances. One of the objectives in our project in Kenya is, how do you increase the output of exports in order to increase the revenue to Kenyan and East African farmers? And avocado is a great product for that. But it's got some specific challenges. They have challenges with theft. So you need to put motion detector and security systems on the farms. In an area where there's a high level of poverty, people will run onto the farms and steal a basket full of avocados because they can get $1.50 a kilo for them. And how do you manage that? In Uganda, we had a project on cattle theft. And how do you track those cattle? How do you use technology to track those cattle? And so we take each one of these individual problems and try to develop solutions for those. And we've come up with so many great things over the past number of years, and continue to add to that portfolio of the ways we can help these governments or the farming organizations.
That's great. It's great that when I got into the ICO and crypto and blockchain in 2017, there were a lot of projects that had a concept of social impact for farmers and for, coffee and all that, but they're just ideas. They're mostly just crowdfunding, right? So it's great to see that it went from this idea of crowdfunding to practical applications to what you're doing. It's great. During part of that, I learned that there's a lot of knife fighting on the ground in some of these areas around coffee, around fruits and stuff like that. So, how have you seen that you've helped? I know you work with government agencies and cooperatives, but how have you seen marginalized farmers improve the quality of their lives by implementing your solutions?
I mean, today, if you take the Kenyan example, with crypto, we're funding the planting of trees, and we can evaluate a farm, tell a lending organization that the farm is a good place to be growing avocados. It doesn't require an individual to drive 400 kilometers from the bank out into the field in order to evaluate a farm. They can get an evaluation using satellite and drone and other inputs from the farm electronically. So we've built an Oracle, we built a scorecard for that, and we're taking that scorecard and moving it around the world. And that shows the farmers now being able to access funding in order to plant trees that otherwise they couldn't afford to plant. When you take a farm that maybe is only making a couple $1,000s in revenue, and they need to invest $10,000 in order to plant avocado trees around their property, it's very hard sell for them to do that. So our ability to support the unbanked, from a perspective of getting access to finance, is becoming a reality. And even some of those farmers who maybe don't have the background, the credit history in order to get credit, can show performance digitally on a small scale in order to substantiate their application to get additional funding. The other ways we see is just from a documentation perspective. In order to meet export requirements, there is certain documentation that's required. And with cattle in East Africa, you can export cattle, and if you have specific documentation around the health of the animal, the background of the animal, and the origin of the animal, you can earn a lot more per cow. You can earn double the money. We have projects in South America and Latin America where we see the input. We see 200% increase in output because they're changing their farming techniques, and the tool becomes an educational piece for the farmer where they can get a recommendation, and then they can go study why is that recommendation being made. Is there a chemical reason or a nutrient reason in the soil for making a recommendation? Or there are 3 or 4 ways you can do a certain thing. And when I grew up, my grandfather taught me some stuff about farming, and I would say a lot of what I learned as a child working on his farm, or as a teenager being on the farm, isn't pertinent today. The way we farm has changed. The technology has advanced. Our understanding of soil mechanics and nutrient levels and planting cycles has improved. And so there's this constant need for education. And now, with the penetration of mobile devices into these farming regions around the world, providing that information and helping them sift through, so much information that's on the internet and determine what's right and what's wrong is really important. So having access to the internet has changed the world for farmers in small regions. But then making good decisions based on that information, and not all information on the internet is useful, really helps a farmer with that decision-making process. And part of that value also comes from the cooperatives, because each farm now then has a community that they can talk to about what's working and what's not working for them.
Sounds awesome to me. Sounds incredible. I love what you're doing. Um, I have one last question. I want to thank you very much for your time today. This has been great. And I could have a whole conversation with you on a different conversation on the accuracy of data on the internet. Let's not go there. One last question is this. Um, how can people find out more information about you, about Dimitra, about what you're all about, become, use your platform? How can they do any of that?
I think the first place to go is go to our website, dimitra.io. And there's lots more information there. There are links to our news page and social media, and links to different interviews and different publications that have covered us. So lots of information available there. And then links to across the top. We have a little toolbar that has all of our social media links there. So it's a good source to start with. And then if you're a farming organization, a cooperative, or what have you, and you want to learn more, just reach out to us. All of our team is listed there. We have sales partners all around the world. If you're unsure, just send me an email, john@dimitra.io, and I will connect you to the right person within our team, and we'll get to have a conversation around your particular farming applications and what we can do to help you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Jamil. You have a great day. I really appreciate you having me here today.